us in, turn us up, and tear the knob off. This is History in the Highway on West Star Media. Boston, 14 December, 1773. It was a long, long time ago, but it seems like just yesterday. The Boston Tea Party, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. They're docked at Griffin's Wharf, and the folks aren't happy. These are American ships, but with British tea in their holds. Katie, bar the door. The fur is gonna fly fast and furious. We'll be right back after we pay the bills. The Boston Tea Party, 245 years ago. So what was it all about? Why did it start? How did we get here? Well, you see, it really all started with the French and Indian War. You're saying the French and Indian War. Well, in Europe, they called it the 7 Years' War. It actually lasted 8, so I got no idea why they call it the 7 Years' War. It all started with George Washington being sent by Virginia. He went and told the French, hey, will y'all get out of the Three Rivers area? That was Pittsburgh back in the colonial day. And the French politely said to Washington, blow it out your backside. So there you have it. The English were going to war with the French. The English sent troops, the French sent troops. And it was war. And it was waged all over the world. Technically a world war. At the end, Britain won. And Britain needed somebody to pay the costs. And the British Parliament decided, well, we'll have the American colonists foot the bill. They've got nobody here in Parliament to argue for them. Yeah, let's do that. We'll put it on them. We'll never hear a word of complaint. Okay, maybe not the best idea, but that's where they were. So there's where it started. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. We called them all intolerable acts because they were taxes that were meant to take money from the American colonists to fill the British war coffers that had been emptied during the 7 Years' War. The French and Indian War, that they said, the British, was fought on American soil. It's only fair that the Americans pony up. Well, you know, that no taxation without representation thing, yeah, this is where all that started. We were hopping mad. We'd protested. We'd boycotted British goods. We'd protested more. The real genesis of this thing was we said, look, we have charters from the king that say we're the only ones who can pass laws for us. We're the only ones who can put taxes on ourselves. Because without representation, a legislature has no right to tax the people. Okay, the British took exception, but they saw the point of precedent. That was true. For over 100 years, only the colonial legislatures had been allowed to tax the colonists. Now, Parliament was trying to. And Parliament said, well, all Englishmen are virtually represented. That didn't hold water with us. There wasn't anybody from the American colonies that was sitting in Parliament in London. So don't feed us that stuff. You know the story. On my back and tell me it's rain. Let's not do that. So the British came up with a plan. See, what had gone on is they were taxing tea. And most of the British tea came from China. So the guys that were, let's say the creative importers of goods, guys like John Hancock, they obtained their tea from the Dutch. And they would smuggle in the Dutch tea and sell it at a lower price than the English tea. Well, the English got wise and lowered the price of tea and put a very small tax on the tea. They figured this way, when English tea is less expensive than the smuggled tea, everybody will buy our tea and they'll pay the tax, establishing the precedent that we can tax you. Well, we saw right through that one. There was no way on earth we were going to buy English tea. In fact, we weren't even going to allow it to be unloaded on America's shores. So look, there's two sides to every story, and in our story, there's definitely two sides. Now, the first side is the Sons of Liberty. You remember those guys. They're mad after liberty, fired up about freedom. These are the guys that are like breathing, snorting, eating, dreaming about independence. And they're led by these three gentlemen, Sam Adams, John Hancock, and Dr. Joseph Warren. Let's meet the leaders of the Sons of Liberty. Well, Sam Adams, first off. Sam Adams had been many things. He's a Harvard man. He'd studied the law. He'd tried to be a brewer of sorts. It didn't work. A malter. Didn't happen. So Sam Adams beer, sorry guys, Adams wasn't that. He'd actually signed up to be a tax collector. Not because he believed in the taxes, quite the opposite. He felt they were unjust, and he refused to collect them. That's why he wanted to be the tax collector. He would not, as he said, grind the face of the poor to make British bread. This guy didn't own a suit of clothes. I mean, honest, when they sent him to the First Continental Congress, his friends pitched in and bought him a suit that was decent to wear. Adams would have worn the same work clothes he wore all the time. He just wasn't that kind of guy. See, and then there was this situation with his dad. His father was a man of some prestige and bearing in the community. He had a good reputation, and he was one of the principals in what came to be known as the land bank, where the colonists could use land to barter for cash or capital, to raise more crops, to build a larger home. And it started to create wealth in the colonies. Now you see across the way there, over across the Atlantic Ocean, the Brits didn't want the Americans getting too wealthy because that meant too much power, unless they felt you were a gentleman with whom they could consort. So too much wealth going into the hands of these miscreant American provincial colonists wasn't what they wanted at all. And so Parliament decertified the land bank and left the principals, the people who'd put up money to fund the bank, holding the bill for all the people who are about to lose everything. Samuel Adams' father died in poverty, in bankruptcy. And for most of his life, Sam Adams was fighting in court lawsuits that were still being brought against his father's estate. So you see why Sam Adams just wasn't a fan of the English. He couldn't stand them. Didn't like the way they did things. Didn't like the way they carried themselves. He knew they looked down their nose at the American provincials. And what they did to his dad, he found reprehensible. So Sam Adams was one of the most vocal in his quest for liberty, freedom, and independence. They called him a rabble-rouser. He roused a whole lot more than rabble. Samuel Adams raised the consciousness of the people in Massachusetts to see themselves as something new and unique, as individuals who could stand up to anyone, including a king. And there's John Hancock. Now, let's say as humble as Sam Adams might have been, John Hancock was exactly the opposite. This guy was a peacock. He was a dandy. He wore silk suits and, the finest of everything. This guy, he was probably the wealthiest man in the American colonies. He had inherited his uncle's shipping interests. He lived on Beacon Street, on Beacon Heights. Yes, he was the Hancock of Beacon Street. That made him the hoi polloi of the hoi polloi. This guy was wealthy, and this guy was a rebel. He would import, of course, those things that were legal and lawful for American firms to import, and those things that the British customs agent said, American ships shouldn't be carrying this. He simply smuggled. As Hancock said, the business of America is business. And he was going to conduct business by hook or by crook. But he really enjoyed conducting business by crook. Hancock fell in with Adams after several disputes with the colonial legislature. Adams seemed to understand the young man's desires, and John Hancock became the protege of Sam Adams. Often the two were inseparable. Sometimes they were at odds and wouldn't be speaking. But it always came back to business for Mr. Hancock, and he saw in Mr. Adams a strong ally to create the ambiance that would promote the general welfare. Give him a break so he could get his ships into port unmolested. And then there's Dr. Joseph Warren. Dr. Warren should be known for so much more than he is. Joseph Warren was the leader of the spy network in Boston called the Mechanics. It was he that actually obtained information from the royal governor's offices and from General Gage's headquarters. Joseph Warren was an ardent patriot, not because he hated the British, not because he had an axe to grind, but because he saw in humanity the spark that was divine, that all men can govern themselves, that there was a greater meaning to being, that there was a greater light that all people could attain. After British soldiers shot several Boston citizens over an argument called the Boston Massacre, whatever your history books tell you, the argument was actually over payment for a wig. And the Sons of Liberty were going to make sure that everyone knew that in America you get a fair trial regardless of who you are, including British soldiers. There was a great meeting, and the British said that whoever gave the speech at that meeting would be arrested. And that was just the kind of challenge that Joe Warren had to pick up. So it was Warren that came to the Old South Meeting House in Boston and delivered a lengthy and vigorous speech, encouraging the people to remember their rights as freeborn Englishmen, to stand against tyranny. He was carried out of the buildings on the shoulders of the people. And surprisingly, the British never arrested him. Now, Joe Warren would be elected the president of the illegal Massachusetts Congress later on during this process. He would be appointed a lieutenant general of the Massachusetts militia after hostilities began. But at Bunker Hill, he chose to serve as a private soldier, leaving the direction of the battle to those who had more experience. In June of 1775, Dr. Joseph Warren gave his life for American independence on Bunker Hill. But these three men led the Sons of Liberty. They promoted their doings. They encouraged their lawlessness and rabble-rousing, and directed the efforts of this group of, as the British saw them, miscreants, as we saw them, patriots, to great effect. And the Sons of Liberty were prepared to pay any price, take any risk, any hazard, to ensure the protection and success of American liberties. Just like the Sons of Liberty were prepared to do whatever they had to do to ensure American liberty, we should be willing to do whatever we got to do to ensure our health of teeth and oral hygiene. Come on, man. Quip is the way to go. The Quip electric toothbrush is the only electric toothbrush that's approved by the ADA. That's the American Dental Association. It's got thousands of verified 5-star reviews, and it makes a heck of a Christmas present. This thing's high-tech, baby. Come on, man. It looks like a high-priced gift, and really, Quip only starts at $25. Come on. This thing takes all the thought and effort out of it. The soft, gentle vibrations do your teeth good, and they don't rip your gums all to pieces. That's why I love Quip. It makes brushing your teeth easy. Hey, you got to get some Quip, man, and you got to get it now. And if you go to quip.com/HTH right now, your first set of refill brushes are free. So go to getquip.com/HTH. That's getquip.com/HTH right now. Get some Quip, baby, and get it today. Okay, so we've met the Sons of Liberty. Who stands against them? Who would dare stand against these noble patriots? Well, that would be the British government. First off, facing off against them is an inept and bumbling foreign policy that has been dictated by Lord North, the Foreign Secretary. See, Lord North, he's one of those guys, again, this guy wears the finest of the finest, has a beautiful powdered wig. I'm sure he has a snuff box stuffed up his lace-covered sleeve. Anyway, Lord North figured he can pass whatever he wants. He saw the colonists as pastoral peasantry who didn't have the knowledge or willpower to stand against whatever edict Parliament might put forward. Poor man was woefully misinformed. This is the same guy that led the English through the entire Revolution. Okay, this is the guy that basically had a number of amazing plans but hired the wrong people to carry him out. Lord North apparently was just not a great judge of character. And then there was a divided Parliament. Now, in England, there's always two parties. There's the Loyalists and what they call the Whigs. See, the Whigs are the opposition party. They're opposed to whatever the Loyalists say. It's not like they're the party of no, but they're the party that tries to rein in injustice, is how they frame themselves during the 18th century. And many of these gentlemen in the House of Commons stood with the American colonists and would openly disagree with His Majesty's government. Okay, they'd say that just because an Englishman doesn't live on English soil doesn't mean he's relinquished his rights. And they saw the point, and they saw the argument for what it's worth. Now, we don't hear much about that in our history books because it's a lot easier for us to say, well, King George III was a tyrant and his parliament was a bunch of boobs. King George III was a tyrant, but it was out of ignorance that he was tyrannical. His ministers were absolutely tyrannical, and they were much more, what would you call it, marketeers. They were using the American colonies to make a buck for themselves. And the Parliament was very divided. Most for the king. That's why many of these acts and taxes were passed. But there were those who were devoutly in support of the American cause. And one of the biggest problems that created was the fear that the rebellion that was beginning in the American colonies might spread to the British countryside. Caused His Majesty's government to get all the more oppressive. And then there's Thomas Hutchinson, at the time governor of Massachusetts. This guy's born in America, but he's the poster child for poor decisions. This poor fella, he was isolated by indecision. For many years, he'd been one of the boys, He was born here. He understands us. He's a local guy. But as he moved higher and higher up in the political strata, he became closer and closer associated with the Loyalists, with the king's ministers. See, in the 1740s, he was pals with Franklin. He was pro the Albany Plan of Union, where all the colonies would come together for mutual protection. But by the 1760s, he was, devoutly in the pocket of the British Foreign Ministry. And when he was appointed governor, he saw this as a great way to make money. Now, sadly for him, he was dumb enough to write letters and explain to everybody just what was going on and what his opinions were. This poor guy, he was centuries ahead of himself. Normally, people need Twitter or a Facebook page to make stupid statements public. This guy did it in letters, which he then gave to a newspaper man. That newspaper man was Benjamin Franklin. Okay, and Franklin didn't personally release the letters. He sent them to one of his associates in the newspaper business. Remember that Franklin owned or had controlling interest in most of the newspapers in America. But when the letters came out that Hutchinson and British ministers in high places were playing both ends against the middle to pocket a lot of money, it pissed folks off on both sides of the ocean. The people in Massachusetts, they wanted Hutchinson's head on a pike. They're finding out that the lieutenant governor, the governor, this guy Hutchinson, had been robbing them blind for the last several years. He'd be stealing cargo, saying, I have to confiscate these, and then selling them. This guy was the biggest black marketer and smuggler going. He made Hancock look like legitimate tradesmen. Well, that's unfair to say. Hancock had a lot of legitimate trades. And the people on the other side of the pond, the British ministry, boy, they were feeling the heat because their butts were right on the burner because of Hutchinson's letters. Hutchinson sent a request back to England saying, let me come back and explain to you guys what's going on. But he didn't get the permission to return until November of 73. Far too late in the year for him to take ship. Remember, the storms in the Atlantic are pretty vicious over the winter. So no ships going anywhere right now. Politics was poison to Tom Hutchinson, and the poor man had drunk the bottle dry. He was stuck in a city that hated him, had nowhere to go. He moved himself out to Castle William, along with all the British troops. It was there that he felt, at least here I'm safe. Oh, but Governor Hutchinson's poor choices would continue. We'll be right back. This is History in the Highway on West Star Media. So now you know, we've got the two sides lined up against each other. The Sons of Liberty on the one hand, the English government on the other. The problem is taxes. That tax on the tea, setting a precedent. The question is the tea, are we going to unload it or not? And adding fuel to the fire is the duplicitous nature of the governor of Massachusetts, the royal governor of Massachusetts, Governor Hutchinson, who's been exposed as a liar and a fraud. Not only that, nobody in Boston knows this yet, Hutchinson has been signed as the distributor of the tea. He can't do that. He's the royal governor. He can't accept a private position. But he has. He's going to make bank on this tea. He's going to make money on the tea. He's going to make money as the royal governor. He's screwing the people of Boston. He's messing with the king's situation. So do you see the situation? Do you feel the tension? Look, Hutchinson knew he was in such hot water with the people of Massachusetts that he'd moved himself out to Fort William. That's a big fort at the opening to Boston Harbor, where he's sequestered there with all the British soldiers. Okay, he ought to be safe. Now, the people of Boston, they're going to hold town meetings. And believe it or not, it's from these meetings where we get the We the People, because in the town meeting, they'd send letters to Hutchinson, signed by We the People. So the first meeting, they sent Hutchinson a letter. Don't unload the tea. Please understand. We don't want to cause a problem. We need the king to understand our position on taxes. Hutchinson writes back and tells him, I've got to unload the tea. Well, of course he's got to unload the tea. He's the guy who's making the money off of the tea. He's in a position where he's not ever going to listen to a thing that the town meeting has to say. He can't make an objective decision or choice. He's all caught up in the crookedness here. At the second town meeting, Sam Adams sends an urgent letter directly to the governor stating, please do not unload the tea. Do not unload the tea. Hutchinson sends back a letter. This is what the town meeting's waiting for. This is the thing. Is the town meeting going to break up? What's going to happen next? There's tension in the air. You can almost smell the fire burning. They open the letter from Hutchinson, and it says, not only will I unload the tea, I'm going to unload it tomorrow morning. At this point, Adams stands before the crowd and says, there is nothing more that this meeting can do for this country. Now, this isn't just I'm throwing my hands up in frustration. This is a sign to the Sons of Liberty. Time to act. Now, interestingly, 3 of the Sons of Liberty who absolutely did not participate in the Tea Party were Adams, Warren, and Hancock, who all stood politely on the stairs of the Old South Meeting House as they watched 100 Sons of Liberty, many disguised as Mohawk Indians, others wrapped in cloaks with their faces smudged with coal, marching irresistibly to Griffin's Wharf. 100 men, 90,000 pounds of tea. It took 100 patriots over 3 hours to dump 342 crates of tea into Boston Harbor. The joke in England is, it made the tea undrinkable, even for Americans. Just to show you how violent the Sons of Liberty really were, after they disposed of the tea, they spent another hour cleaning up, making sure that the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver were all shipshape in Bristol fashion and ready to sail. They swept the decks, for heaven's sake. And then, into the night, they disappeared. The American Revolution was only months away. The people of Boston had spoken. We all know what happened next. The American Revolution came along. But on the 245th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, we need to remember our history. We need to remember what happened that day. That 100 men stood against an empire. They stood against tyranny. They stood against injustice. Thomas Jefferson said, "Where the people fear government, there is tyranny. Where government fears the people, there is liberty." We don't have to go down to Griffin's Wharf and throw tea in the harbor. We need to participate. We need to be informed and let our voice be heard. Hey, if you like what you're hearing, you'll love what you see. Go to YouTube and check out our channel, History in the Highway. See you further on down the road.